rules in a straightforward way.
As a constitutional law professor, as a former Federal Circuit Court of Appeals judge, how do you answer concerns that Facebook is violating President Trump's free speech?
Well, I mean, the simple legal answer is that private companies are not bound by the First Amendment, and so he has no First Amendment rights. He's a customer. He's not, Facebook is not a government, and he is not a citizen of Facebook. But in a broader sense, what we are trying to do is bring some of the most important principles of the First Amendment, of free expression law globally, into this operation. Facebook has been, it exercises too much power. They are arbitrary, they are inconsistent, and it is the job of the Oversight Board to try to bring some discipline to that process. So what we have done is to identify ways in which Facebook has been non-transparent, ways in which they've been arbitrary, and trying to nudge them toward a more free speech, free expression friendly environment.
I want to push back a bit on the free speech argument. I understand the legal argument, but as you say, you think that Facebook is exercising too much authority. Listen to what Republican Senator Josh Hawley had to say about all this.
These platforms like Facebook, like Google, they censor our speech. They shut out new market entrants. They shut out competitors. Why? Because they've gotten to be monopolies, and that's why I think we've got to take them on and break them up.
The argument is that Facebook and Twitter and other platforms have become so big that they can, in effect, silence people in the digital age. And the argument is, yes, President Trump is able to speak, but it's not a matter of freedom of speech with something like Facebook. It's a matter of freedom of reach. How do you respond to that?
Well, it's of course up to Congress to decide what the antitrust laws are going to be, but this is not a First Amendment issue. It's not as if you can't go to court. No judge in the country would hold that Mr. Trump's free speech rights were violated. Now, if Congress wants to pass new rules similar to the must-carry rules or the fairness doctrine of the past, they can do that, and the courts will decide whether that comports with the First Amendment. The Oversight Board has nothing to do with that. Our job is to provide oversight for Facebook to make sure that they are applying their rules in a fair, consistent, non-arbitrary fashion.
But I want to pick up on exactly that point, sir. There's certainly a practical effect to the Facebook ban. President Trump in 2020, as Mike Emanuel mentioned, got his message out to millions of voters through Facebook. He raised millions of dollars through Facebook. I want to, when you were appointed to the Oversight Board, you said it was, quote, your goal that Facebook act as a, quote, neutral platform that, quote, does not decide elections. Couldn't one argue that what Facebook is doing now goes exactly what you said the goal of the Oversight Board is? It's acting on bias to very much hinder President Trump's ability to run for re-election.
So there might be bias either way. Remember, Mr. Trump is the one who issued those inflammatory posts at the very time when rioters were invading the Congress and shutting down the constitutionally prescribed process for counting electoral votes. He issued those posts. He's responsible for doing that. He bears a responsibility for his own situation. He put himself in this bed, and he can sleep in it.
Do you think, I understand this isn't a board question, but I'm asking you as a law professor and former federal judge, do you think that these enormous platforms like Facebook, like Twitter, should be regulated? Do you think these enormous platforms should be broken up?
Chris, that is not my job to decide. Congress can decide that. You know, as a co-chair of the Oversight Board, My job is, while Congress is figuring out what to do, to try to improve matters, to try to bring some fairness and consistency to Facebook. And let me emphasize, fairness and consistency are absolute bedrocks of freedom of expression rules. It's freedom of expression depends upon a lack of vagueness. It depends upon even treatment of everyone. Now, if Facebook simply let Mr. Trump off the hook completely, it would not be even treatment of everyone, because all users of the platform are subject to the same set of rules, and that includes Mr. Trump.
I have a final question. I've got about a minute left here, Professor. When Mark Zuckerberg set up the Oversight Board, he said he wanted to establish separation of powers, if you will, that you would act as a kind of Supreme Court to oversee public policy issues involving Facebook. But it was Zuckerberg who appointed the 4 co-chairs of the board, including you. It's Zuckerberg who set up the trust that pays all of you. I guess the question is, how independent is the Independent Oversight Board?
Let me tell you, I've gotten to know these 20 people around the world, and the danger that they are toadies for Facebook is just about zero. There is no many of them have spent their careers criticizing Facebook. We are not beholden to Facebook. Most of the decisions so far have been overturning Facebook's decisions. And by the way, most of them requiring Facebook to put material back up. It has been a voice largely for freedom of expression and as well as,
right,
as clarity and consistency and transparency.
We're going to have to leave it there. Professor